but my talk tonight is on Chesterton and autism. Now, this year's Chesterton conference uses the slogan, "Learning to Think Again." As we explore this theme, it's important to reflect upon just how G.K. Chesterton's mind worked. Everybody who knows even a little about Chesterton's life knows that he had a brain with remarkable abilities, and he was also known for eccentric and distinctive behaviors. Chesterton had the ability to dictate an essay to his secretary while writing something totally different in longhand, which was critical to his prodigious output. And Chesterton had no qualms about criticizing popular opinions and conventions, and he stood out physically as well as intellectually. Chesterton was known for his unique regular wardrobe and was notoriously absent-minded. On one occasion, getting on a train, forgetting where he needed to go, and having to telegraph his wife to find out where he was supposed to be. Her answer was home. In recent years, several people familiar with Chesterton's life and work have started to wonder if he was autistic. With his behaviors, unconventional characteristics, and intellectual interests, he certainly fits many of the diagnostic criteria for having autism, but as it is hazardous to make a diagnosis based solely on secondary evidence close to a century after the subject has passed away, the purpose of this talk is not to try to argue that Chesterton was autistic, but to illustrate the critical role that his writings and ideas have had in helping one specific person with autism develop his own mental processes and survive in a world in which it is often quite difficult for the autistic mind to function. As you probably have guessed, that person is me. Over the last 12 years, I've done a great deal of research into autism, due mainly because of my being diagnosed at the age of 28. If I had been born 20 years later, I would have very likely been diagnosed very early in life. I certainly had many of the classic symptoms, including very intense and focused interests, repetitive behaviors, and heightened response to stimuli. For me, there was one issue that was really difficult for me, and that was connecting with other people. Social cues always were, and still are, a major challenge for me, and my reactions to various situations can be intense and often debilitating, and these are classic symptoms of autism. Before moving further, it's important to ask the question, what is autism? There are a lot of misconceptions about autism out there, and many stereotypes and oversimplifications that muddle the general public's understanding of what autism is and how people with autism deal with the effects of it. Even though autism has been studied for decades, in-depth research into the subject is still a relatively recent avenue of exploration, and there's still a massive amount of information to be learned about it. Much contemporary research requires tearing down the misconceptions that proliferated for a long time. For many decades, autism meant severe mental disability that precluded participation in society, but we now know that there are different kinds of autism. In the past, treatments were shockingly inhumane, with institutionalization, separation from families, and lobotomies being inflicted on autistic people. Terminology, recommendations for treatment, and diagnostic criteria have evolved dramatically over the decades. One general currently used term is autism spectrum disorder, but this term is hotly debated as disorder is a controversial word for many people. Right now, however, I want to focus on the word spectrum. It is a very important part of the terminology. There's a saying I really like that goes, when you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Autistic people have very diverse personalities, likes and dislikes, mental processes, and lives despite being covered by umbrella terminology. Stereotypes about autistic behavior have disseminated exponentially in the wake of broader public awareness. Some people with autism are able to function totally normally in society, while others have serious problems coping with any social situation. Some have severe disabilities, including being nonverbal and being unable to hold down a job. Some have intense likes and dislikes towards things that other autistic people are totally neutral towards. And some people with autism can have extreme reactions to certain stimuli. There are some subcategories of autism, and one of which was once referred to as Asperger's syndrome, though that terminology is no longer used in official diagnoses and has officially been replaced with autism spectrum disorder. Still, a lot of people still use the term Asperger's, and it has a special meaning for them as their first knowledge of a medically recognized reason for why they thought and acted as they did. Additionally, many people object, as I said, many people object to the term disorder, and Asperger's have gained a kind of affection in many communities as well. Now, I was diagnosed with the Asperger's form of autism a couple of years before the terminology was changed. People with Asperger's are predominantly male, though significant numbers of women have been diagnosed as well. Social skills can frequently be a serious challenge for those with Asperger's, and they often have a lot of trouble with nonverbal cues. Many have a lot of difficulty forming friendships, engaging in social situations. People diagnosed with Asperger's have a much lower probability of forming romantic relationships than the general population. Though each case is unique, some have outstanding memories, high intelligence, and cling to routines, and have strong, perhaps even obsessive interests in topics that fascinate them. Nuance, sarcasm, and certain styles of humor may be challenging for such people to understand. Those are the internal problems that autistic people can face. Unfortunately, some of the biggest challenges people with autism deal with are external, coming from other people with an incomplete understanding of how autism works. The reactions people with autism have to various stimuli are not treatable in the same way one can treat a phobia. The reasons autistic people develop reactions autistic people develop in response to anything from sounds to colors to smells are not necessarily based on fear, and repeated exposure can intensify rather than decrease reactions, though this is not always the case. And indeed, some situations, such as social interactions, can be improved with familiarity. The important point is that autistic reactions must not be mistaken with neuroses. Another problem is the minimizing of this condition. It's quite common to hear comments such as, "Oh, you're just shy," or "You need to get over it. Lots of people are uncomfortable in social situations," or "Stop being so inflexible," or "Stop talking about that, you're being weird," or "Don't you realize you're being annoying?" The fact is, autism is much more than a little awkwardness or an attachment to a routine or a narrow, highly focused interest. It's a distinct wiring of the brain, a way of thinking, reacting, and feeling that is genuinely and markedly different from the vast majority of society. And the complexity of the autistic experience is something that is very hard to convey to people who do not personally experience it. One analogous condition that I use from time to time is dyslexia. People understand that a dyslexic brain is wired to process information differently from the vast majority of people, causing them to process images, letters, and words differently. Some dyslexic people may look at a page of text and see letters backwards or upside down compared to how most people see them, or perhaps they see the words move and spin around the page. I repeat, autism is a spectrum, so the description of my experiences may only be partly similar to those with other people, or may even be quite different from others. I think it is highly likely that in the decades to come, just as there's a type 1 and type 2 diabetes, people with autism may be categorized with differently numbered or lettered types of autism, as reactions can be so radically dissimilar. Autism is not a form of mental illness, and it cannot be cured. And indeed, many people with autism take umbrage to the fact that it is often thought of as a disease. Some experts estimate that a little under 1% of children fall somewhere on the autism spectrum. Some cases can be very mild, others are debilitating. The number of children diagnosed with autism has raised dramatically in recent years, though this is most likely not due to some force causing more autism, but due to heightened awareness of what autism is and how to identify it. I often find myself wondering what my life would have been like if I'd been diagnosed as a child. Today, kids with autism get personalized counseling. I was lucky. I grew up in a loving and supporting family with parents trained in psychology and psychiatry. But it wasn't until I reached adulthood that the diagnostic criteria were better rectified. The concept of the autism spectrum, where people could be high functioning in many respects while still being disabled in other ways by autism, was not widely understood. It's only been about 2 decades since a more thorough understanding of autism has made its way through the psychiatric and psychological disciplines. There's been a lot of debate in mental health circles over how to define whether or not someone has autism, and 2 different doctors may disagree on whether or not someone should be diagnosed as autistic. I'm sure that in the decades to come, the diagnostic criteria will continue to change. But increasingly, I do not believe that an effective understanding of autism can come solely through the analysis of psychologists and psychiatrists, but also by the input of people with autism themselves, as no one knows the workings of their minds better than they do. Still, it can be a severe challenge to explain what's going on in your head, especially when you're not sure of a baseline of how the average person thinks. I know it took me a very long time to be able to put my own experiences to words, and it's a great challenge to do so, because delving into old memories brings back a cascade of old emotions and reactions. But in order to clarify what autism is, I need to delve into my life story and the role that Chesterton played in helping me. Growing up, attending the University School of Milwaukee, I frequently felt it impossible to connect to my peers, and social situations were often torturous for me. Without formal training to assist me, I had to help myself find my own pathway to functioning better socially, and I found it through the venue that was most comfortable for me: books. There are 3 authors who have been absolutely critical to my mental development process, and I discovered all of them between the ages of 8 and 12. The first was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, whose Sherlock Holmes stories were pivotal to my observation and deduction skills. Sherlock Holmes taught me how the world could be seen and understood rather than just experienced. The second was Agatha Christie. I read all of her mystery novels between the ages of 10 and 12. And they were crucial not only in refining my logical thinking skills, but also helping me understand why people behaved as they did. The concept of lying or hiding one's true thoughts and goals was confusing to me, and figuring out the identity of murderers through fair play detective stories helped me understand how people can try to deceive you, and how you can figure out when someone's not being truthful. And the third, of course, was Chesterton. After finishing all of Christie's books, I started looking for new mysteries to read, and after being underwhelmed by most contemporary writers, I started looking for more authors from the golden age of mystery. Noted that Chesterton was occasionally referenced in Christie's books, And soon I found a complete volume of the Father Brown mysteries and read it over spring break of 7th grade. The secret of Father Brown is famous for describing the priest's tactics for placing himself in the minds of the criminals he pursues. His secret is his ability to replicate the psychology and the souls of the people he's looking for. He observes actions and determines what mentality is needed to create such a mindset. And he thinks as hard as he can until he believes that he has created an exact copy of the mental workings of the criminal he is pursuing. This was a revelation for me, and I decided to try it, though not to solve crimes, just the mystery of trying to figure out why other people act as they do. Everyone I met, whether it was a teacher, a friendly classmate, a bully, or even the grumpy lunch lady, I worked hard during my spare time to pick a person and really think about what made that person who they were. I can't claim to have perfectly replicated their minds, and in most cases, the image of them that I created probably bore no connection to the real person. But after following the lead of Father Brown, suddenly the people at school ceased being impenetrable enigmas, and I think that's how I started forming real friendships. One of the most pernicious and damaging misconceptions about people with autism is that they have no capacity for empathy. This is a monstrous slur. The vast majority of autistic people are very capable of feeling empathy, and many exhibit extremely intense compassion towards people they care about. But there's an important issue that has been misconstrued. People with certain forms of autism can have far more difficulty understanding the thoughts and motivations of people whose mindsets, opinions, and reactions differ from theirs. It's a critical distinction. What is often unfairly mistaken as a lack of empathy is actually a heightened challenge in comprehending other thought and emotion processes. It's not that we don't care, it's that we don't understand. And that's a massive difference. The more I trained myself through reading Chesterton, as well as Doyle and Christie, the more I was able to connect. It wasn't just improved relationships with my peers, it was academic success as well. I need to stress that the effects of autism on the human mind are not entirely negative. Some autistic people even see their mental processes as a kind of superpower. On the contrary, people with autism, due to looking at situations from different ways, can bring innovation and creativity to many fields, as well as they can think outside a metaphorical box that constrains people used to following more conventional lines of thought. Reading the mysteries of Chesterton and Christie and Doyle helped enhance my mental abilities. Looking at the Father Brown mysteries, or the whodunits of Agatha Christie, or the observational powers of Sherlock Holmes, all helped me learn close attention to detail, or how to break free of arbitrary intellectual constrictions, or taught me that the obvious is not always true. The fantasy writer Neil Gaiman recently wrote about how many Chinese educators were disappointed in how their students lacked the capacity to produce original thought. They could follow instructions and memorize facts, but they couldn't be innovative. One business teacher in China noticed that if he gave an example about starting a business and used a fast food restaurant as an example, all of the students would write about fast food restaurants for their projects. In an effort to figure out how to improve their students' abilities, the researchers questioned as many of the most creative and innovative American minds that they could, and found that to a person, all of them had extensively read fantasy books when they were young. This led to the theory that the creativity came from thinking about not just what exists, but what could exist with the power of imagination. And a person's future or mental trajectory is dependent upon one's reading material and mental exercises from childhood. And this led to a new program where Chinese children were told to read more fantasy. I really believe that just as fantasy may lead to enhanced creativity, reading fair play mysteries that depend upon logic, observation, and lateral thinking can shape one's mental abilities as well. By the way, I should mention that I read a lot of fantasy growing up as well. But no matter how much you try to shape your mind, there's only so much you can do. You can build up your brain power just like you can build your muscles, but you can't repair an injury through sheer force of will. And when your brain is wired a certain way to provide a response to a stimulus, it often can't be reprogrammed. So now please try an experiment. Take your right leg, stick it out, and start drawing a clockwise circle with your big toe. Keep going. Keep rotating your foot over and over and don't stop. Keep going, don't stop. Now stick out your right hand and keep your eye on your foot. Quickly draw a circle in the air with your right index finger, but do it counterclockwise. Did you see what happened? Try it again. You'll notice that even though your brain sends signals to your foot to keep turning clockwise, when your fingers start turning counterclockwise, your foot automatically turned counterclockwise as well, even though you didn't try to change its direction. I use this as an example of how our brains are wired. We try to behave in a certain manner, and we may think we're in control of ourselves, such as our movements, but then there's a little stimulus that sends everything going in a totally different direction. Just as turning your right index finger counterclockwise will reverse the clockwise rotation of your right foot, dozens, even hundreds of stimuli or little actions can affect the brain of an autistic person. A certain sound, the wrong smell, the sight of something unpleasant, even the wrong texture can trigger a flood of memories or reaction that can paralyze me physically or mentally. Unlike most people, I can't take an argument. When someone starts yelling at me, I start flashing back to scores of previous arguments, and I start feeling intense, stabbing pains from my head to my toe. I can't respond, I can't think, and all I can do is react. Often I become violently ill afterwards. Though through following Father Brown's advice really helped me connect with my peers better and led to more and deeper friendships than I'd ever had previously, just because Chesterton had helped train me to understand, or at least think I understood people better and how to more effectively interact around them, that didn't mean that social situations were much easier or fun for me. As everybody who's ever been to high school knows, they're busy places. When you're constantly surrounded by people, bombarded by constant noises, lots of smells, and the unyielding stress that comes with a rigorous curriculum, you can understand how you can have all sorts of unwanted reactions. I need to explain the phenomenon of what I call an Asperger's moment. It's a sudden, intense burst of sensory experience that temporarily leaves me unable to function properly or even move or speak. It's comparable to a panic attack, but the two reactions are very different, as I know from having battled both. In a panic attack, I can freeze up, feeling my pulse race, my muscles tighten, especially in my chest, and my brain stops working. I can't think, and my mind is largely blank, outside from feelings of pain and danger. An Asperger's moment is comparable, but its nature is quite different. An Asperger's moment is triggered by a memory or a sensory trigger, and instead of my mind freezing up, my brain runs rampant. Uncontrollable visual images flash through my mind. I hear countless sounds that aren't actually there, and I pick up numerous smells, tastes, and textures purely from memory as well. It is literally a case of too much information. I often start shaking and my hands get clammy. Other than temporary paralysis, the other main point of comparison between panic attacks and Asperger's moments is a racing pulse. Both require a recovery period of at least a few hours, and often I don't fully recuperate from either experience until after a full night of sleep. Throughout middle and high school, the constant barrage of noise and other people led to multiple Asperger's moments every day, causing me to rush to the bathroom just in time to be sick. The most worrying aspect of all of this was dreading that the wrong person would come in, leaving me to be branded with an unflattering nickname that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I rarely socialized with my friends on the weekends. After 5 days of being surrounded by people, I needed to be alone with my family for a couple of days to recuperate. Whenever I had a free period, junior or senior year, I would retreat to the quietest and emptiest parts of the school I could find, corners of the library reading room, and silently do homework or read to rest up so I had the strength to face the rest of the day. In order to recreate my experiences, I have to reiterate that my autistic reactions are not always negative. Autistic brain wiring has helped me academically and professionally in countless ways because I can remember lots of details and narratives, follow logical mathematical principles, and pursue topics of interest to me. I have a very strong memory when it comes to personal experiences and things that interest me. In contrast, it's very challenging for me to remember details that I can't fit into a clearly flowing narrative, and distractions can hurt me when I'm trying to take a test. But when I enjoy something, I really enjoy it. I develop strong attachments towards people and things that I like, and high school started out rough for me, but the more I used the principles of Father Brown to try to understand people better, I started deriving more emotional support from friends. It took a long time, but by my junior year, my connection to the University School of Milwaukee, or USM, had grown so strong that my school, along with my home, are the only two places in the world where I've ever felt really happy and comfortable. But the downside with finally feeling like you belong someplace is that eventually you're forced to leave. While most of my peers couldn't wait to start fresh at college, I felt that my world was ending. And in many ways that was true. Separated from my family and nearly all of my friends, college was extremely difficult for me. Surrounded by constant dormitory noise and having no respite or place of comfort, I lived for the weekends when I could return home and recover. But it wasn't just the surroundings that affected me, it was my studies as well. You hear a lot today about people wanting to see people in film or television who look like them. I had a comparable problem with academics. I was reading so many books by the world's leading minds in all sorts of topics, and I found I had yet to find a single person who I felt thought like me. It wasn't until midway through my sophomore year of college that, at the end of one exhausting day, that I decided to take a break by using the fairly new invention of a search engine to look up some of my favorite authors, wondering what I'd find. Eventually, I typed in Chesterton, and it led me straight to what was then the American Chesterton Society and Gilbert magazine. Before then, I hadn't read anything of Chesterton other than mystery stories. Until I read Chesterton, I hadn't come across a single intelligent, powerful voice addressing the various prominent figures of history, politics, economics, art, literature, and everything else that espoused arguments I found illogical or morally abhorrent. There were a lot of those at college. I started reading every Chesterton essay I could find, following the way he made an argument, the ways he drew upon all sorts of references to enhance the verbal portraits he was creating. And after being disappointed by acclaimed novel after acclaimed novel that I found flat and soulless, I started developing my theories that there had to be a better way to write literature, create characters, and shape narratives, all inspired by Chestertonian perspectives. But there was more than that. After reading Chesterton's Man Alive, I learned that behaving and thinking differently from other people wasn't necessarily wrong, especially when their ingrained mental habits are making them miserable. Sometimes it takes someone with a different kind of mind to see alternatives or see the nonsensical and the conventional. Autistic people are continually frustrated by people whose opinions are very different from their own. The ball and the cross showed me how even when you fiercely disagree with someone, you can find a way to argue with respect and recognize the decency and honor in that person. I don't want to go into every single detail, but college was not much fun for me until I found Chesterton. Afterwards, following his influence, learning seemed more beneficial and even thrilling again. I eventually earned magna cum laude on a literary honors project inspired by Chesterton, and right after graduation, I presented at my first Chesterton conference. The next 2 years were largely positive ones for me. I returned home to Milwaukee and started my master's degree in history from Marquette. With my brain's focus on narratives and the effects of actions and their consequences, focusing entirely on history meant that my classes were invigorating, even exhilarating for me. For the most part, aside from the crowded bus rides to and from school, I was doing well until April 30th, 2006, just a couple of weeks before wrapping up my degree, when my mind shattered. I had the first of a series of migraines, the most powerful and crippling pain I ever felt in my life. For nearly a month, hardly a day went by when I wasn't laid low by the feeling that a white-hot poker was battering me around the head. I don't know if it was lasting damage from the migraines themselves or the medications I was taking to stop the pain, or a combination of the two. But when the worst of the migraines subsided in the middle of June, my mind wasn't what it was just 2 months earlier. For all my life, I wondered what it would be like to live without all of the reactions that I now know to be part of the autistic experience. After the migraines, I didn't feel the same strong reactions to stimuli like smells and sounds, though they didn't go away altogether. And I didn't freak out the same way after being touched by a stranger. And my mind didn't start racing at any moment. And I didn't flash back to 50 memories at the sliced trigger. In fact, I lost access to many of my memories. But it wasn't a relief. I didn't feel much of anything at all. For years, my brain felt sluggish and in a perpetual fog. By now, I had started my PhD program, and it was a tremendous challenge. Each class was far harder than the master's courses. Where once I couldn't type fast enough to write down all of my ideas for essays, it became a continual challenge to string together enough words to make a single sentence. On a really bad day, it was enough of an uphill battle to arrange enough letters to make actual words. Where once my memory could hold thousands of books and full sensory memories of the lion's share of my life, now my memories were disjointed and incomplete, and I routinely came to an end of a page without any memory of what I'd read. I found myself digging through old photographs and yearbooks, desperate to find something that would help me piece together a broken memory. All of my assignments took at least 4 times as long as they once did, leaving me with hardly any time for anything fun. I don't know how I managed to battle my way through 10 more classes and work as a teacher's assistant as well, but I flunked my first round of doctoral qualifying exams and had to devote all my efforts to studying for another 6 months before I managed to pass my second attempt. Incidentally, it was right after I failed my first round of DQEs that I was diagnosed with Asperger's. There was one exercise that helped me, my work as a columnist for Gilbert magazine. By that point, I was writing reviews of books, movies, and television shows, and before working, I routinely read or reread some of Chesterton's literary criticism for inspiration. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but I think that served as a background for helping me to teach myself to think again. Chesterton always delved into the heart of what an author said, or the complex nature of a person's arguments, And by applying this kind of critical lens to a creative work, I felt like I could feel my mind getting stronger again. But I was still in rough shape, and I started going to Mass at least once a week, sometimes more when I was at Marquette. For most of my life, whenever I've been inside a Catholic church, I've had what I now realize were Asperger's reactions due to hyperstimuli. I never got this in churches of other denominations, incidentally. Make of that what you will. But I could attend Mass without feeling sick or overwhelmed. Unfortunately, my mind still wasn't right. In early 2012, nearly 6 years after the migraines hit, and after nearly 4 years of working on my dissertation, I had nothing usable. I had tons of notes and absolute garbage in terms of written work. Seriously, looking over some of my dissertation work from 2009 to the start of 2012, I'm appalled. It was quite simply awful prose with no insight whatsoever into the subject. I could barely turn out a paragraph a day, and with the 7-year deadline from the start of beginning the PhD program looming in just over 13 months, I was faced with a very real possibility that I might not get my degree. Then the miracle happened. From the time I graduated from USM, it was my dream job to come back and teach there. In mid-March of 2012, I saw a job opening for a U.S. history teacher position, and I applied for it that night. For a month, I spent most of the day dreaming how I'd teach if I've got the job, and I'd lie in bed, unable to sleep, wondering how I'd handle all of the challenges of the position. I can't explain it, but that's when my brain started coming alive again. This was the first time since the migraines hit that I genuinely felt that my best days could be ahead, not behind me. And this hopeful, optimistic possibility started to reawaken the imagination and excitement that had lain dormant for nearly 6 years. Memories I thought were lost forever came flooding back. For years, I had much more trouble with puzzles like the jumble in the newspaper, but now for the first time in 6 years, I could go through, put together jumbled words easily, and was able to use my imagination and feel actual happiness on a daily basis. After 1 month of this, I wasn't completely better, but I was sharper than I'd been over half a decade. My memory was better, my writing had improved dramatically, and then I got the crushing news that I hadn't gotten the job. I was devastated. For a few hours, I started spiraling downwards, and then something pulled me back up. The knowledge that long after I'd given up hope of being able to think and imagine the way I used to, I was doing better. After years of never being more than 50 or 60%, much less than a bad day, I was now around 75%, maybe even 80. I'd stopped reading much for fun, as I couldn't remember new books. Then, seeking comfort, I picked up old favorites like the Father Brown mysteries and Agatha Christie novels, and rereading them started to open the floodgates. Marcel Proust was famous for writing about all the memories that came back when he ate a madeleine. I got a comparable reaction with eating all sorts of foods, wearing certain clothing, seeing sights, hearing music, and other everyday actions. When I reread Chesterton's The Invisible Man, I remember the lessons I learned about how most people overlook obvious details because they don't fit in the bend of their minds. The chief mourner of Marne reminded me how much more there can be to a story than what most people think they know. And the healing continued. The positive and the negative came back. My dissertation writing got exponentially better, and I could turn out 5, even 10 strong pages a day. I could remember evidence without having to sift through hours trying to find through my notes, trying to find the little details I needed. But for the first time in 6 years, the Asperger's moments were coming back. I was shaking. I was getting overwhelmed with floods of memories at a moment's notice. And most of all, I was getting terrible reactions at Mass again. A few months earlier, I could sit in a pew without feeling overstimulated. Now, nearly every time I attended, I broke out into cold sweats, and I had to rush out right afterwards or even before Mass ended, and once again I became violently ill or close to it. Now, after successfully getting my PhD, as well as an additional Master's of Library and Information Science 2 years later, I noticed that not only had my mental abilities, both helpful and debilitating, gotten stronger than ever, but I had challenges I needed to address. When I turned 33, I decided I needed to officially enter the Catholic Church, having spent most of my adulthood having my religious views formed by Chesterton. But I had a problem, as my reactions at Mass were growing much stronger, leading me to feel dizzy in the middle of most services. Thankfully, Father Jacob Strand, then at St. Monica's in Whitefish Bay, has some training in working with autistic people, and he helped me through a unique preparation program. I've been watching televised masses and attending Mass in a small chapel in a retirement home, and this allows for less powerful reactions most of the time, though I still get tremors and nausea just watching Mass on television. I found myself making steady progress in handling social situations, which started getting stickier since I began recovering from the migraines. And I started doing exponentially better in 2018 when I got a job as a substitute teacher at USM. But since the pandemic began, however, my autistic reactions have gotten much stronger, matching the intensity I felt at their high point during puberty. A lot of this has to do with having much less social contact, making the rare interactions more intense, as well as the added pressures coming from social situations now. Traveling has always been a challenge for me, and lately I've had to battle strong Asperger's moments just riding in a car or being in a room with more than a couple of people in it. When I ride in the car, I don't just feel moving forward. I can feel intense car sickness and the feeling that all of a sudden all these other cars in every direction are coming towards me, or that all the images, whether it's the street signs, the buildings, they may be waving or moving and flashing. I hear all these different sounds and reactions, and I can become very sick when I'm traveling. Being unable to see other people's faces through masks hurts my interaction, and having trouble breathing through a mask is a problem too, as I tend to breathe improperly when I'm agitated, such as when I'm in a crowded social situation. And part of this has been a reason why I haven't attended more conferences, because it's been harder for me to get to them. Now, please note, I'm not trying to go for the cup of inconvenience here. That's not my goal in telling you this, but I just felt I'm trying to explain these reactions and why I haven't been able to interact more and go to places where I'd really like to. So now that I've traced the development of my thinking process, I need to explain some more details of it, particularly how I see the world. I don't just see the present, I see the past and the potential future as well. If any of you are familiar with the classic television series Upstairs, Downstairs, the iconic closing scene, if you'll excuse some very minor spoilers, is comparable to my own experiences. This will not provide much in the way of spoilers for those of you who haven't seen the series, but in the show's last few minutes, Rose, the longtime servant, walks through the empty rooms of the house where she's worked for a quarter century. As she moves around, she hears snippets of conversations she's had over the years as the memories come flooding back. The difference between Rose's nostalgia and my own experiences is that I don't just hear dialogue from the past. I actually see images from the past as well, though not as clearly as they appear in real life, but faintly, almost ghost-like. It can make it very hard to talk to someone when one is trying to talk over multiple conversations that one has had with the same person in the same place. If I look at someone I've known for a while, I don't just see them as they are now. I can see their clothing and hairstyle and other appearance changes from how I've seen them over the years, flashing back and forth in front of me. When I talk to Dale Ahlquist, I can see him with and without the beard, just talking to him. In recent years, adapters of Sherlock Holmes have toyed with the ideas that Holmes may have a form of autism, though no official diagnosis is ever really stated on the shows. Nevertheless, they've managed to replicate my own mind workings and those of many other autistic people. In the Robert Downey Jr. movies, Holmes routinely plans out every action he takes before he does it, anticipating consequences and the steps he needs to take to achieve the outcome he wants. When I first saw this, I was stunned, as it was an uncanny recreation of my own mental processes. Comparably, in the Benedict Cumberbatch television series Sherlock, Holmes's observations about people and objects come in the form of little word descriptions that can be seen hovering around the relevant object, which is a mental reaction I often have when I'm trying to visually process my surroundings. And so right now, as I'm reflecting back on my past experiences at a Chesterton conference, I'm not just seeing this auditorium right now, I'm looking at the one in the Twin Cities as well. And I'm seeing people who were there then who weren't there now. I mean, I'm actually, in terms of tastes and smells, I can taste and smell the Stilton cheese that I had at at the conference before my talk, and so many other, whether it's the meals there, the sounds there, the Thai restaurant meal I had with my family the night before I presented, all these other things. And that's it. The textures. What is the feeling of the rough sheets in the dorm where I was staying, or something like that? Everything, all that, I can feel it now. Whether it's the sheets against my skin, taste in my mouth, sounds. So right now, all this is going around, and I'm making an intense effort just to focus on this speech now, to keep from getting distracted. Of the many challenges that come with autism, one of the harshest is the difficult nature of explaining how our minds work and the nature of their reactions. If I try to explain why I feel angry, I don't just feel emotions about what made me angry recently. I mentally relive dozens of instances where I felt similar anger simultaneously. And I become overloaded with emotion and unable to express my thoughts. One of the biggest stumbling blocks to a fuller understanding of autism and helping people who have it with related challenges is the fact that autistic people's personal perspectives on their neurological state have been overshadowed in the professional sphere by doctors who have compressed, oversimplified, and distorted the autistic experience to fit neat diagnostic categories, and the public sphere by writers and dramatists who have a varying capability. Some authors have done brilliant work in capturing the complexity of autism and presenting it in an unconventional but effective manner to the general public. Maybe the most popular and successful creative work to try to convey the autistic mindset to the general public is Mark Haddon's novel, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, as award-winning stage play adaptation. In this story, Christopher John Francis Boone, a teenager who clearly has a form of autism, but as in many presentations of such minds in books and entertainments, he is not given an official diagnosis, as people seem distinctly reluctant to put official names to these kinds of mental workings. After reading the book, which depicts the character trying to solve the mystery of the death of his neighbor's dog, I felt as if Christopher Boone's voice was exactly the same as my own mental workings when I was 15. His interests and reactions mirrored my own so closely that aside from the very different perspectives towards religion between us, it felt like Haddon was looking into my mind when he wrote the book, covering everything from Sherlock Holmes to mathematics to the Monty Hall problem. The stage version has used numerous lighting and special effects to mimic Christopher Boone's mental workings, and though not all of them really reflect how I personally think and react, I think some of them are very imaginative and useful ways and metaphors to make intangible experiences visible. In the past decade or so, there has been an explosion of artistic depictions of autism in film and television, especially in the mystery genre, of varying quality and depth. Others have reduced autism to a one- or two-dimensional set of quirks and affectations that dilute autism to mere difficult behavior and general weirdness in the eyes of others. Despite an improved understanding of autism proving to be a critical aid to many people on the spectrum, with familiarity has come new misconceptions and challenges. If there's one misrepresentation of autism that really upsets me, it's the use of the pejorative phrase spurging out, when someone starts ranting or freaking out or rambling about topics solely of interest to them, not necessarily an autistic person behaving this way. There's a widespread belief in many circles that autism isn't actually real, it's just a trendy excuse for neuroticism. I hope that by talking about issues like I'm doing now, I can help to dispel these misconceptions. This lecture was by far the most difficult thing I've ever had to write in my life. I've been working on this for months, and it's been an uphill battle to get more than a few sentences put on paper at a time. I suppose this is because it's so personal and because it's so difficult to describe the autistic experience. Over the past couple of years, I've started a very disorganized outreach program for people connected to the Milwaukee Archdiocese for people with autism and people who love them. Many autistic people have severe reactions at church, and it leads many of them to leave and never come back. This is a big issue that is only starting to be addressed. A lot of people with autism need help, especially children who don't realize that most other people see the world differently from them. They need guidance with their education and personal relationships, and later they need help with the job market. Today, many people get help throughout their formal schooling, but when they graduate, they lose a lot of their support, and the results can leave them adrift and feeling helpless. And this is why I really need to thank my parents for all their help over their years, which has been absolutely crucial to my survival. So thanks to them as well. Now, many people think that the way to help autistic people is to help them act and behave like neurotypical people. But based on personal experience, I find that this is not often a feasible goal, and that autism is not meant to be erased, but assisted. Conformity with general society may need to be supplanted with accommodation and understanding. Now, I don't see myself as a victim, just as someone who thinks and responds differently from most people. I am, however, very concerned about autistic people who have it worse than I do and can't explain or protect or take care of themselves and don't have caring families to support them. So don't pity me, pity the nonverbal who can't explain what's going on or the pain they're feeling. I'm thinking too about the Father Brown story, The Eye of Apollo, in it where the Kalon, the prophet of the sun, promotes the idea that any ailment can be cured if the mind is quite steady. Now, Father Brown knew this to be a lie, and this is like many people firmly believe that autistic people need to be chastised or browbeaten, or just need to think hard enough to overcome their problems and follow more acceptable behavior. They are also perpetuating this falsehood. Now, I still have a lot of problems connected to the way that my mind works that I'm trying to overcome. Like many autistic people, I have trouble finding full-time work, though I have multiple part-time jobs that allow me to work at home. And my dating experience has been singularly awkward and unsuccessful, but I'm not giving up on anything. I don't know if Chesterton had a form of autism himself, but whether he did or not, he and his work and life stand as an inspiration to me to keep going and never surrender to despair. I didn't have the guidance many autistic children have today, but Chesterton was one of the formative influences who helped me survive and thrive, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. Would you mind taking a few questions?
All right, if anyone does, go right ahead.
I have one question I'd like to ask. I think it's probably on other people's minds. Well, I actually have about 8 questions, but I'm going to try to stick to just one. Could you just tell us a little bit more about your conversion? That is the topic of the conference this year, and I think you alluded to it, but if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit more about that, please.
I'm not even sure if the word conversion really works for me because I've never really seen myself as anything else. I've been kind of was raised more kind of non-denominational Christian. My dad's Baptist, my mom is Catholic, but I always, whether it's following things, reacting to things, feeling things, it's just a matter of, sometimes it was just, I guess, but it was always a daunting experience to actually be inside a church, and sometimes it's got to the point where I felt it was just so important for me to actually keep going, to make it official, because there was so much to it that no matter how painful or difficult or stressful it was, you have to do this, Chris. So.
Other questions, please. Here we go.
I have a question directly related to that. I know that some dioceses have advertised or offered low sensory masses so that families who maybe can't come to other masses because of the situations you described can experience those. Do you have any experience of those or any thoughts on those? I wondered.
Right now, I've been working on it. As I said, and especially with the pandemic, with a lot of people not being able, going out, doing things that, I've actually been working on this big email chain with a bunch of people. There's about 13 or 14 people right now who are corresponding, and a lot of them with children or adults have thought they could really use it. And we've been working, a couple of deacons have been talking to us about maybe trying to find a small place where we could have again, low sensory mass, smaller, or where people can be more spread out, or with so it's something we're working on. And again, as I said, everybody's busy. There's so much to do, but as this happens, we're going to try to make it work, and hopefully we'll see what happens over the coming years.
Thank you. That was a great talk. Just a quick question: is there any information if autism affects people kind of in the STEM, like the science, technology, engineering, versus like very artistic, painting, music? Is there any differences?
Well, this is one of the things that's being explored, because right now we're talking about all sorts of different personal experiences. And I know many engineers have been diagnosed with Asperger's and so forth. So, I mean, as I said, many fields. I just happen to have the sort of mind that works better with words than others. But I'm sure that it's happened, and as I said, many different kinds. And I think there are some memoirs and blogs where people talk about their own work, whether it's in science or engineering or math. I mean, one of the plot lines of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is that the central character is a math savant. So, as I said, it's hard to pick just a few things, but the more you dig around, and there's not as many official stories, but I'm hoping, more and more there'll be more studies, more personal experiences. We start to understand more and how the similarities between different disciplines, different fields, and just how is there something that makes someone more verbal or more numerical, so deal with the abstract or more hands-on. And I hope that's something people more and more, both mental health experts and people who have it, will collaborate in the years to come.
Question back here.
Thank you. I really appreciate your talk, and your courage to be able to do this was really inspiring to me. I was just wondering what kind of sensory situations are most triggering. Like, does going into the countryside or into nature affect you in a negative way, or is it more like urban kind of situations?
Oh, it's definitely everything. I mean, when you talk about urban, especially, I have never been, since I was a kid, I had a lot of trouble going through downtown Chicago, say. The honking horns, the big crowds, or the smell of the street. I think you all can figure that it was intensified for me. But I get that a lot in nature as well, whether it's, with the, watching birds overhead, and please let those birds be continent, or thinking like that. Or sometimes, looking at the ground, looking to make sure you don't get dirt or anything else around you. And sometimes it's just a reaction to, or sometimes I love the feeling of the wind, but sometimes I don't like getting hit by a leaf or something, or a buzzing fly or something that can be a distraction. That's why sometimes it's different things, whether the flickering light, the sounds, it does, sometimes different things affect me different ways, and familiarity can mean a lot too as well. So it's like I said, it's only certain spots where I feel really comfortable. Where at home or at University School of Milwaukee, somehow I'm able to feel it's still like it's like a gyroscope. Everything's still spinning, but it has balance in certain situations.
On a different note, I have a question. What, as an Agatha Christie person, what do you think of the Hugh Laurie adaptation of Why Didn't They Ask Evans?
Oh, I actually just got the screen for that, and after I was just able to see the third episode, the last episode this week, and I thought I quite liked it. I didn't think it was the most brilliant adaptation, but I think first of all, it was like 95% faithful, and it was made by someone who had a genuine affection for the work and wasn't trying to inject his own politics or present day concerns into it. And I thought he also succeeded in having really likable main characters that you could enjoy seeing. So if it wasn't the absolute best I had, it's definitely one of the best I've seen in a while. It's just because I thought it was a pure pleasure, and I was very grateful to Hugh Laurie for doing what he did.
Thank you again. Thank you again. But Dorothy Sayers.
Oh, I love her work as well. I also started reading her around 8th grade. Went through all the Lord Peter mysteries, and she wasn't as much of an influence at that time too, because I already sort of built up my triumvirate. But I just really, I find her work fascinating. I just really, really enjoy it, and I've been in the process of writing more about classic mystery writers, and I actually hope to write. If someone else doesn't beat me to it, someday I'd like to write a book on some of the science behind Dorothy L. Sayers' murders.
Well, get going on that, Chris. I have to say that when I watched the new Father Brown episodes from BBC, it took me days to recover from the first one.
Is there any explanation that can be articulated as to why animals are helpful for those who suffer from autism, like dogs, horses, that type of thing?
It's hard to tell, because sometimes it's easier to form an attachment. Sometimes that a dog is never going to hit you with a question that's going to make you uncomfortable. There's something, I'm allergic to most pets, but there's something wonderful about many animals, whether it's, for example, it's fish or a bird or a cat or a dog or some people that people can connect to, that it brings it out. And I think even though, I have really bad allergic reactions, my sister, who has a black, mostly lab named Clay, who recently passed away, and there was something very pure about him in his way to connect with people, and how he just, he was very food oriented. And there's just something, you can connect with a dog when you have trouble understanding how certain minds work. Like, why would somebody do that? That's hurting someone else, or that's full. And then suddenly, why did the dog knock down that can of cookies and pry it open? Well, because he was hungry. And that's the sort of thing. You can see a dog like Clay. Clay was very food oriented. And you can understand he was smart too, because at one time, even when he had a hip dysplasia and couldn't move, Clay was able, because my mother was always giving us educational toys growing up. And as soon as Diana got puppy Clay, she started giving the dog educational toys. This little box where where the dog can move the flaps around with his nose and paws and get to a treat. Well, Mom didn't realize that she was teaching him how to break into all sorts of things to get treats. This past Christmas, right before he died, he was sitting quietly in the back room while we were the rest of the family was playing a game, and it turns out my sister comes back and says, he managed to crawl off his mattress and get into my backpack, unzip it, and eat a whole bag of treats. And then a moment later says, actually, that's not right. He ate 2 bags of treats. So it's the idea too, you'd figure out, why would a dog do that? But, it's a little easier to figure it out.
Well, we're going to hear from Mr. Chan.
Just as Chris's dad, I just want to make a shameless plug that he has published his first fictional novel called Sherlock's Secretary, and that's available on Amazon.
if you wouldn't mind mentioning a couple of the other books that you've written too.
Oh, well, I've written a bunch of things that are just starting to be published. One, actually a nonfiction mystery criticism called Sherlock and Irene: The Hidden Truth Behind a Scandal in Bohemia, which is all looks at what we thought was Sherlock Holmes' biggest failure was actually a success, out from MX Publishing. I also wrote the book Murder Most Grotesque: The Comedic Crime Fiction of Joyce Porter. And Joyce Porter is probably the funniest mystery writer you've probably never heard of. But she wrote a series of novels about Inspector Dover, who was in Scotland Yard's laziest and most unhygienic detective. And these are hilarious stories. She wrote some others, and I wound up writing a book about all her work. So now that finally, after the years, the Inspector Dover novels are available in Kindle, you can hopefully track them down and read them. And I said Sherlock's Secretary was a fictional novel that is came out from MX Publishing, based on the true fact that in real life, 221B Baker Street was the home of a bank for many years. And because so many people would send letters to Sherlock Holmes there, they hired someone full-time to answer his mail. And so I thought, no one had ever written a book about someone that with the job of Sherlock's secretary ever getting into an adventure of his own. So I wrote that last summer that came out, and I've been pleased with that. And I've got another book coming out on from Level Best Books, which also published Murder Most Grotesque, hopefully around February. It's another mystery novel called Ghosting My Friend, which is going to be one of my part of my Thunderbrook series about a private detective who works as a student advocate, helping children with problems that most adults won't help them with.
Fantastic! Wow.
Yeah, I've written a lot of shorts. There's a short story collection of Sherlock Holmes stories I wrote called "Of Course He Pushed Him." In the title story, it's all about an alternative universe where the remainder of Moriarty's gang, after Holmes's disappearance, tries to convince the world that Watson's a liar and that it was Watson who actually pushed Holmes off Reichenbach Falls, and Holmes has to come back to clear his friend's name. But a bunch of other Sherlock Holmes pastiches I've written over the years that just came out of last month as well. And
well, I'm going to leave you with one last task, or before we break. But I publicly want putting this challenge to you with Mr. Research for Agatha Christie Incorporated. Chesterton and Agatha Christie were both the charter members of the Detection Club, but no one can find out the date of the first Detection Club meeting.
Have you found the book The Golden Age of Murder by Martin Edwards?
Have I found it? Haven't found it yet. I wonder where it is.
Well,
Someone lost it.
Well, Martin Edwards is currently the president of the Detection Club, and like 4 or 5 years ago, he wrote a book, won tons of awards, The History of the Detection Club. So if anybody has anything there, it would be him. And I'm friends with him on Facebook. He's actually the one, he found out about my work with Agatha Christie, he friended me. And he was the one who advised us in Murder Most Grotesque to Level Best Books. But I think I would look at the that book.
You would look at it because that's your job. You have to find it.
I don't know too. If you saw, there was this one BBC radio play about the founding of the Detection Club too. But
there's lots of stuff on the Detection Club, but no one that I have ever seen, any source can say, well, no one quite knows when it's always late 1929 or early 1930, somewhere in there. We're doing a chronology of Chesterton's life. We'd like to know the date, Chris. So that's your assignment.
I'll look it up.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for Chris.